What happens when you take the most dangerous predator in known space and lock it in a cage with what appears to be harmless prey? Most civilized species would call it barbaric. The Zeltharian Empire called it entertainment. For 3,000 years, the Empire had dominated the galaxy through superior technology and cold calculation. Their arena fights were legendary, carefully orchestrated battles between the fiercest creatures from 100 worlds. But they had never encountered anything quite like the species that called itself human. When the transport ship Wanderer's Hope was captured near the Outer Rim, its lone survivor seemed unremarkable. No claws, no natural armor, no poisonous fangs. Just soft pink skin, strange forward-facing eyes, and an unsettling tendency to smile even when facing death. The Zeltharians laughed at their newest acquisition. This weak creature wouldn't last 5 minutes against a Krithak stalker. They were about to learn why humans had earned whispered legends across the galaxy, not as prey, but as something far more terrifying. Because when you corner a human, when you strip away their civilization and their mercy, when you force them to choose between death and survival, you don't get a victim. You get something that should have stayed buried in humanity's violent past. The Zeltharians wanted a show. They were about to get a revolution. The Wanderer's Hope had been humanity's first serious attempt at long-range exploration beyond the Sol system. Captain Sarah Chen had volunteered for the 5-year mission knowing she might never return home, but the promise of discovering new worlds and perhaps friendly alien life had been worth the risk. Now, as Zeltharian boarding parties cut through her ship's hull with plasma torches, she realized how naive that hope had been. "Captain, they've breached decks 2 through 4, her communications officer reported, his voice tight with fear. "We've lost contact with engineering." Sarah looked around the bridge at her remaining crew members. 12 people left out of the original 53. The others were either dead or captured, dragged away by the tall, reptilian aliens who moved with mechanical precision through the corridors. The Zeltharians had appeared without warning, their massive dreadnought emerging from what seemed like empty space to disable the Wanderer's Hope with weapons that made human technology look like children's toys. "All hands, this is the captain," Sarah spoke into the ship's intercom system, knowing it would probably be her last official order. "Activate emergency protocols. Destroy all navigation data and research files. Do not let them learn the location of Earth." The bridge doors exploded inward in a shower of sparks and twisted metal. Zeltharian soldiers poured through the breach, their scaled skin gleaming under the emergency lighting. They stood nearly 8 feet tall, with elongated skulls and eyes that reflected light like polished amber. Each carried weapons that hummed with barely contained energy. Behind them came a figure that commanded immediate attention. Unlike the soldiers, this Zeltharian wore elaborate armor decorated with intricate patterns that seemed to shift and move in the light. A translation device at its throat converted its hissing speech into perfect English. "I am Commander Vexter of the Zeltharian Third Fleet. Your vessel is now property of the Empire. You will surrender immediately or face consequences that your primitive minds cannot comprehend." Sarah's first officer, Lieutenant Marcus Webb, stepped forward with his hands raised. "We surrender. Under galactic law, we demand treatment as prisoners of war and—" The plasma bolt struck him in the chest, vaporizing his uniform and leaving nothing but ash where he had stood. The smell of ozone and burned flesh filled the air. The remaining crew members recoiled in horror, but Sarah forced herself to remain steady. "Your species has no legal standing in the galaxy," Commander Vexter said, as if discussing the weather. "You have no treaties, no alliances, no protection under any law we recognize. You are simply resources to be allocated as the Empire sees fit." Over the next hour, the surviving crew was processed with clinical efficiency. The Zeltharians scanned each human with devices that seemed to catalog everything from bone density to neural activity. Most of the crew was sorted into groups that Sarah suspected were destined for slavery or worse. The elderly ship's doctor and 2 injured engineers were simply eliminated on the spot. When they reached Sarah, the scanning device emitted a different tone. Commander Vexter studied the readout with obvious interest. "Unusual muscle density, heightened reflexes, elevated stress hormones that remain stable rather than spiking," he mused. "Tell me, human, what was your function on this vessel?" "I was the captain," Sarah replied, meeting his alien gaze without flinching. "A leader, interesting." Vexter made a gesture to his subordinates. "Separate this one, mark her for special processing." As they dragged her away from her remaining crew, Sarah heard Communications Officer Park calling her name. She looked back once to see him and the other survivors being herded toward what looked like cargo containers. That was the last time she saw any of them. The journey to the Zeltharian homeworld took 3 weeks in the belly of their dreadnought. Sarah was kept in a cell barely large enough to lie down, fed a nutritional paste that tasted like chalk, and subjected to daily examinations by alien scientists who treated her like a laboratory specimen. They tested her reflexes, her problem-solving abilities, her tolerance for pain and stress. Through it all, she maintained a stubborn silence, refusing to give them any information about humanity or Earth's location. The Zeltharian homeworld was a monument to industrial efficiency. Massive cities stretched across continents, their spires reaching into an atmosphere filled with the smoke of countless factories. Sarah caught glimpses of it through the transport's viewports as they descended toward what looked like a massive Colosseum complex on the planet's largest continent. The facility was enormous, capable of holding millions of spectators. As their transport landed on a platform near the complex's base, Sarah saw other ships arriving and departing constantly. Some carried what looked like captured creatures from dozens of different worlds, while others appeared to be wealthy spectators coming for entertainment. "Welcome to the grand arena of Zelthar," Commander Vexter said as guards escorted Sarah from the transport. "The greatest entertainment complex in the known galaxy, where the Empire's citizens come to witness the natural order of predator and prey." They led her through a maze of corridors lined with cells containing creatures Sarah had never imagined. Some looked like oversized insects with razor-sharp claws. Others resembled walking plants covered in thorns and poison sacs. A few appeared almost peaceful until they noticed her presence and threw themselves against their containment barriers with murderous fury. "For 3,000 years, we have collected the galaxy's most dangerous predators," Vexter continued his guided tour. "We study them, catalog their abilities, and ultimately determine how they fit into the Empire's hierarchy of strength. The weak serve the strong, or they are eliminated. It is the most fundamental law of existence." They stopped before a massive cell that seemed to be carved directly from living rock. Inside, something moved in the shadows, something large enough to make the ground vibrate with each step. "The Krithak Stalker," Vexter said with obvious pride. "Native to the death world of Mortar 7. Adult specimens stand 12 feet tall and possess claws that can slice through battleship armor. Their natural camouflage makes them nearly invisible, and they can survive in environments that would kill most life forms in seconds. They are, by every scientific measure, the perfect predator." The creature stepped into the light, and Sarah's breath caught in her throat. It looked like evolution's answer to the question of how to build the ultimate killing machine. Its body was sleek and muscular, covered in scales that seemed to absorb light. 6 limbs ending in claws the size of swords, a serpentine neck that could strike like lightning, and eyes that tracked movement with inhuman precision. "In 2 days, you will face this creature in the arena," Vexter informed her. "Thousands of spectators will watch as nature takes its course. The strong will survive, and the weak will feed the strong." "You're going to feed me to that thing for entertainment?" Sarah asked, surprised by how calm her own voice sounded. "Entertainment, yes, but also science. We are curious to see how your species responds to hopeless situations. Will you run? Will you hide? Will you simply accept death with the dignity that higher life forms show when facing inevitable defeat?" Vexter's translation device couldn't hide the cold amusement in his voice. "Our xenobiologists have studied your species from the data we extracted from your ship's computers. Humans appear to be persistence hunters at best, adapted for long-distance travel and tool use rather than combat. You have no natural weapons, no armor, no particular strength or speed. Against a Krithak stalker, you should provide exactly 97 seconds of entertainment before the creature ends your suffering." They placed Sarah in a holding cell that was marginally larger than her transport prison. Through the energy barrier that served as a door, she could see other cells containing what she assumed were other scheduled entertainment. Most of the creatures inside were clearly predators, but a few looked as helpless as she probably appeared to her captors. That first night, Sarah lay on the cell's hard floor and stared at the ceiling, thinking about her crew, her family back on Earth, and the home she would never see again. The logical part of her mind accepted that she was going to die, probably in the most horrible way possible. But another part, a deeper part that connected her to every human who had ever faced impossible odds and refused to surrender, began to plan. The next day brought more tests and examinations. Zeltharian scientists measured her reaction times, her problem-solving abilities under stress, and her psychological responses to various stimuli. They seemed particularly interested in her brain activity when shown images of violence and death. "Fascinating," she heard one of them say to a colleague. "The neural patterns suggest active tactical assessment rather than fear paralysis. This species may be more complex than initial observations indicated." During the second day of testing, Sarah began to understand the layout of the facility. Guard rotations, security checkpoints, the location of weapons storage, and most importantly, the arena's preparation areas. She memorized everything, filing away details that her captors assumed a primitive human wouldn't be capable of understanding. On the evening before her scheduled execution, Vexter visited her cell one final time. "I confess I have developed a certain curiosity about your species," he said. "You show no signs of fear, no pleading for mercy, no desperate attempts to bargain for your life. Are all humans so resigned to death?" Sarah looked up at him from where she sat cross-legged on the floor. "We prefer the term patient." "Patient, an interesting choice of words. Tell me something, Commander. In all your years of running these games, how many predators have you seen turn out to be prey in disguise?" Vexter's amber eyes glittered with something that might have been amusement. "None. Predators and prey are defined by biology, not circumstances. A creature's fundamental nature cannot be changed by wishful thinking or desperate hope." Sarah smiled, and for just a moment, something in that expression made the commander take an involuntary step backward from the energy barrier. "We'll see about that," she said. The next morning, as the first rays of alien sunlight filtered through the arena's transparent dome, Sarah was escorted through corridors filled with the sound of thousands of spectators taking their seats. The noise was deafening, a mixture of excited conversation, and the roars of various alien species worked into a frenzy by the promise of violence. They stopped at a preparation chamber where a Zeltharian technician offered her a selection of primitive weapons: wooden clubs, stone knives, spears with metal tips. Traditional gear for arena prey, designed to provide a brief illusion of hope before inevitable defeat. "Choose your weapon, human," the technician said. "Make your death memorable." Sarah examined each option carefully before selecting a simple wooden spear with an iron tip. Not because she thought it would help her kill the Krithak stalker, but because of what she could do with it before the creature arrived. The arena floor was a circular space roughly 100 meters in diameter, surrounded by energy barriers that rose 30 feet into the air. Beyond those barriers, the stands stretched up in tiers that seemed to go on forever, filled with species Sarah had never seen before. All of them were here to watch her die. At the center of the arena floor stood a pillar covered in ancient Zeltharian script. According to the translation device they had given her, it read, "Here the strong claim their rightful place, and the weak accept their fate." Sarah walked slowly around the perimeter of the arena, testing the energy barriers, examining the surface of the floor, looking for anything that might give her an advantage. The crowd's noise faded to background static as her mind shifted into a state she hadn't experienced since her military training on Earth. Every detail became sharp and significant. Every possibility was analyzed and cataloged. High above in the premium seating section, Commander Vexter watched her movements with growing interest. "Look at her behavior patterns," he said to the xenobiologist beside him. "No panic, no desperate attempts to escape. She's conducting a tactical assessment." Impossible. The stress of facing certain death should have triggered fight-or-flight responses by now. Her species lacks the neural development for complex strategic thinking under extreme duress. "Then explain what we're observing." Before the scientist could answer, the crowd's noise reached a crescendo. On the opposite side of the arena, a massive gate began to rise. In the shadows beyond, something moved with predatory grace. The Krithak stalker emerged into the arena like death given physical form. 12 feet of perfect evolutionary engineering, it moved with fluid precision that made every step seem like part of a larger hunt. Its camouflage ability made it seem to flicker in and out of visibility as it adjusted to the arena's lighting. Sarah stood perfectly still in the center of the arena, her spear held loosely in both hands. To the spectators, she looked like prey frozen in terror. But her eyes tracked the creature's movement with calculating precision, nodding its gait, its preferred direction of approach, the way it tested the air for her scent. The Krithak stalker circled her slowly, taking its time. It had learned through countless arena battles that prey often provided better entertainment when allowed to run first. Fear made them desperate, and desperation made them do interesting things before they died. But this prey wasn't running, it wasn't even moving, it just stood there watching. The creature completed its first circle and paused, tilting its serpentine head as if puzzled by her behavior. In 3,000 years of arena combat, it had never encountered prey that didn't react to its presence. That was when Sarah spoke, her voice carrying clearly through the arena's acoustic design. "I know what you are," she said, her words causing a ripple of confusion through the crowd. "Perfect hunter, perfect killer, apex predator of your world, but there's something you should know about humans." The Krithak stalker took a step closer, its claws leaving deep gouges in the arena floor. Sarah's grip on the spear tightened almost imperceptibly. "We're persistence hunters, we don't run from predators." Her voice dropped to barely above a whisper, but the arena's systems picked up every word. "We follow them until they get tired, then we kill them." The creature lunged. The Krithak stalker's lunge covered 20 feet in less than a second, its 6 limbs working in perfect coordination to bring its claws to bear on what should have been an easy kill. But Sarah wasn't where the creature expected her to be. At the last possible moment, she dropped and rolled to her left, the iron tip of her spear scoring a shallow line across the predator's flank as it passed overhead. The crowd's roar shifted from excitement to confusion. Prey wasn't supposed to draw first blood. The stalker landed and spun with fluid grace, its amber eyes focusing on Sarah with new intensity. A thin line of dark fluid seeped from the scratch on its scaled hide. The wound was insignificant, but its implications were not. This prey had not only avoided its attack, but had managed to counterattack in the same motion. Sarah came out of her role in a combat crouch, spear held in a guard position that would have been familiar to any human martial artist, but looked completely alien to the Zeltharian spectators. Her breathing remained steady, her heart rate controlled. The military training she had undergone before joining the space program had covered hand-to-hand combat, but she had never expected to use those skills against a 12-foot alien killing machine. "Interesting," Commander Vexter murmured from his observation box. "The human demonstrates tactical awareness and combat reflexes. Perhaps we underestimated her species' potential." The xenobiologist beside him frantically consulted his data pad. "Impossible. According to our analysis of their cultural transmissions, humans are primarily tool users. They should lack the instinctive combat responses we're observing." "Then your analysis was incomplete." Down in the arena, the Krithak stalker had begun to circle again, but this time its approach was more cautious. It had learned through evolutionary necessity to respect any prey that could inflict damage, however minor. Its camouflage ability flickered more rapidly now as it tried to determine the optimal angle of attack. Sarah turned slowly to keep the creature in sight, never allowing it to move completely behind her. Her mind raced through everything she knew about predatory behavior. Most hunting animals relied on specific strategies that had worked for millions of years. They were perfectly adapted to their environments and their usual prey, but that specialization could become a weakness when facing something unexpected. The stalker feinted left, then lunged right with lightning speed. Sarah threw herself backward, not quite fast enough to avoid the creature's claws entirely. 2 razor-sharp talons raked across her left shoulder, shredding her prison uniform and leaving parallel cuts that began bleeding immediately. But as she fell backward, Sarah drove the spear upward with both hands. The iron tip caught the stalker in the soft tissue beneath its jaw, penetrating several inches before the creature's momentum carried it past her. This time, the wound was more than cosmetic. Dark blood flowed freely from the puncture, and the stalker's roar of pain and anger echoed through the arena like thunder. Several spectators in the lower tiers actually flinched at the sound. Sarah rolled away and came to her feet, her left arm hanging limply at her side. The creature's claws had done significant damage, but she forced herself to ignore the pain. Pain was just information, and she couldn't afford to be distracted by information she couldn't use. The Krithak stalker had stopped circling. It stood perfectly still, its serpentine head weaving slightly as it studied this impossible prey. In its long life as the arena's premier attraction, it had killed hundreds of opponents. Some had been stronger, some faster, some better armed, but none had ever managed to wound it twice in their first encounter. More importantly, none had ever shown the cold calculation it was seeing in this strange, soft-skinned creature's eyes. Sarah adjusted her grip on the spear, holding it one-handed now that her left arm was compromised. She began to move in a slow circle around the arena's perimeter, always keeping the same distance from the stalker. To the crowd, it looked like she might be trying to find an escape route, but Commander Vexter was beginning to understand what he was actually witnessing. "She's not trying to escape," he said, his voice filled with dawning comprehension. "She's controlling the engagement." The realization spread through the arena's more sophisticated spectators like wildfire. This wasn't a hunt anymore. It was something else entirely, something none of them had seen before in 3,000 years of arena combat. The human was making the Krithak stalker chase her. For the next 10 minutes, Sarah led the creature on a careful dance around the arena floor. Every time it lunged, she was just out of reach. Every time it tried to use its superior speed to corner her, she found a way to slip past, and each time she managed to inflict another small wound with her spear. None of the individual cuts were life-threatening, but they were adding up. More importantly, they were taking a psychological toll on the stalker. This apex predator had never been forced to work for a kill before. It had never faced prey that refused to act like prey. Sarah could see the frustration building in the creature's movements. Its attacks were becoming more aggressive but less precise. It was starting to make mistakes, leaving itself open for longer periods as it committed to strikes that should have ended the fight but somehow never connected. She was also learning. Each exchange taught her more about the creature's capabilities and limitations. The stalker was incredibly fast in straight-line attacks, but less agile when changing direction. Its camouflage worked best when it was stationary, making it less effective during active combat. Most importantly, it was built for quick kills, not extended engagements. Meanwhile, Sarah was designed by evolution for exactly this kind of persistence hunting. Her ancestors had chased mammoths across frozen tundra, following them for days until exhaustion made them vulnerable. They had tracked deer through forests, never quite catching up but never falling behind, until their prey's superior speed became meaningless. The crowd's mood was changing. What had begun as excited anticipation of a quick kill was evolving into something approaching nervousness. The Zeltharian spectators had come to see the natural order confirmed. Predator dominates prey, strength conquers weakness, the superior destroys the inferior. Instead, they were watching their perfect predator being systematically dismantled by something that looked like it should be food. "This is impossible," the xenobiologist insisted, though his voice lacked conviction. No prey species could maintain this level of performance against a Krithak stalker. The stress alone should have triggered physiological collapse by now. Commander Vexter was studying Sarah's movements with the intensity of a military strategist analyzing enemy tactics. "Perhaps we need to reconsider our definition of prey species." In the arena, the stalker made its biggest mistake yet. Frustrated by its inability to land a killing blow, it committed to a full-power lunge that carried it completely past Sarah when she sidestepped at the last second. As the creature struggled to regain its balance, Sarah stepped inside its reach and drove her spear deep into its side, just behind the front legs where the armor was thinnest. The stalker's scream of pain was so loud that several spectators covered their ears. It spun frantically, trying to dislodge the weapon, but the spear was embedded too deeply. Dark blood began flowing more freely now, not just from the latest wound, but from the dozens of smaller cuts Sarah had inflicted during their extended battle. For the first time since entering the arena, the Krithak stalker tried to retreat. It backed away from Sarah, its amber eyes wide with something that looked remarkably like fear. This couldn't be happening. It was the perfect predator. She was supposed to be prey. Sarah stood perfectly still, making no move to pursue. Her left arm was useless now, and she had lost her primary weapon, but her breathing remained controlled and her eyes stayed locked on the stalkers. She looked like a woman who had all the time in the world. "Come on," she said quietly, her words carrying through the suddenly silent arena. "You're not done yet." The creature's response was a desperate charge, all strategy abandoned in favor of overwhelming aggression. It came at her with claws extended, jaws gaping, every ounce of its remaining strength focused on finally ending this impossible fight. Sarah waited until the last possible moment, then dropped flat on her back. As the stalker passed overhead, she grabbed the spear that was still embedded in its side and used the creature's own momentum to tear the weapon free, creating a massive wound that sent a spray of dark blood across the arena floor. The Krithak stalker crashed to the ground and lay still. For several seconds, the arena was completely silent. 50,000 spectators stared at the motionless form of what had been their champion predator, trying to process what they had just witnessed. Then, slowly, the creature's sides stopped moving. Sarah struggled to her feet, swaying slightly from blood loss and exhaustion. She looked up at the tiers of shocked faces staring down at her, then at the body of the creature that was supposed to have killed her. "The weak accept their fate," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the arena's acoustic systems. She gestured toward the stalker's corpse. "But we're not weak." The silence stretched on for another heartbeat. Then someone in the upper tiers began to cheer. The sound was quickly picked up by others, spreading through the crowd like wildfire until the entire arena was shaking with applause and roars of approval. In his observation box, Commander Vexter watched Sarah collapse to one knee, finally succumbing to her injuries. Medical teams were already rushing onto the arena floor, but he barely noticed them. His mind was racing through the implications of what he had just witnessed. "Impossible," the xenobiologist repeated, though the word had lost all meaning. "No," Vexter said slowly. "Not impossible. We simply didn't understand what we were looking at." He gestured toward Sarah as the medical teams began treating her wounds. "We assumed she was prey because she lacked obvious predatory adaptations, but we failed to consider that some predators might evolve to look harmless." "You're suggesting that humans are predators." "I'm suggesting that humans are something we've never encountered before. They appear to be persistent predators that have evolved to hunt other predators." Vexter's amber eyes glittered with an emotion that might have been respect or fear. "Do you realize what this means?" The xenobiologist stared down at the arena floor where Sarah was being loaded onto a medical transport. "It means we may have made a serious error in judgment. It means we may have just declared war on a species, specifically evolved to hunt things like us." As the medical teams rushed Sarah toward the facility's treatment center, she remained conscious just long enough to see Commander Vexter descending from his observation box. There was something different in his posture now, something that suggested he was no longer viewing her as entertainment. The games had changed, and everyone in the arena could sense it. Word of the humans' victory spread through the facility like wildfire. By the time Sarah was transferred from the medical bay to a new cell, crowds of Zeltharian staff were gathering in the corridors just to catch a glimpse of the creature that had done the impossible. Some looked curious, some appeared frightened, and a few watched her with what could only be described as calculation. Her new accommodations were significantly better than her previous cell. Instead of a bare cage, she found herself in what appeared to be guest quarters with actual furniture, a private bathroom, and a food preparation area stocked with items that were actually digestible by human standards. The energy barrier that served as a door was still there, but it felt more symbolic than practical now. Commander Vexter visited her on her second day of recovery, accompanied by a small entourage of scientists and military advisors. "How are you feeling?" he asked, settling into a chair across from where Sarah sat on the room's simple bed. "Like I got in a fight with a 12-foot killing machine," she replied, flexing her bandaged left arm experimentally. The Zeltharian medical technology had accelerated her healing dramatically, but she could still feel the ache of recently mended muscle and tissue. "You realize that you've caused quite a stir," Vexter continued. "In 3,000 years of arena combat, no prey species has ever defeated a Krithak stalker. Maybe that's because you've never put a human in your arena before. Perhaps, tell me, Captain Chen, how common are individuals like yourself among your species?" Sarah considered the question carefully. She could sense that her answer might have implications far beyond this conversation. "Define like myself." "Military training, combat experience, the ability to remain calm under extreme stress while conducting tactical analysis. We have a saying on Earth, an army marches on its stomach. It means that warfare is ultimately about logistics and planning, not just individual heroics. Most humans aren't soldiers, but most humans are capable of becoming soldiers if the situation requires it." One of the advisors, a tall Zeltharian with elaborate scarification covering his arms, leaned forward. Are you saying that your species is naturally militaristic? I'm saying that we're naturally adaptable. We survive by learning, not by being perfectly evolved for a single environment. Sarah met his gaze steadily. We're also naturally protective of our own. When you captured my ship and killed my crew, you weren't just attacking individuals. You were attacking humanity itself. The room fell silent. Finally, Vexter spoke again. What would you say if I told you that this conversation could determine whether your species lives or dies? Sarah smiled, and once again, several of the Zeltharians took involuntary steps backward. I'd say that you're about to learn why humans don't make good prey, she replied, and why we make very dangerous enemies. The news of Sarah's victory traveled through the Zeltharian communication networks faster than anyone had anticipated. Within hours, every major news outlet in the Empire was broadcasting footage of the impossible battle, and within days, the story had spread to every corner of known space. For the first time in 3 millennia, someone had proven that the Empire's perfect predators weren't quite as perfect as advertised. The reaction was immediate and complex. In the upper levels of Zeltharian society, there was fascination mixed with deep unease. The arena had always served as more than just entertainment. It was a demonstration of the Empire's philosophy that strength determined worth. If a seemingly weak species could defeat their champion predator, what did that say about the natural order they used to justify their dominance over hundreds of other worlds? Commander Vexter found himself at the center of a political storm he had never anticipated. Emergency sessions of the Imperial Council were called, military advisors demanded immediate threat assessments, and xenobiologists raced to reanalyze every piece of data they had collected about humanity. But it was the reaction from the Empire's subject species that truly worried the Zeltharian leadership. On the mining world of Kepler VII, a group of Altarian slaves watched the arena footage on a smuggled communication device. They had been conquered by the Empire 50 years earlier, their peaceful civilization crushed by superior technology, and the threat of their entire species being fed to arena predators. For decades, they had accepted their fate as inevitable. Now they were asking questions. If this human could defeat a Krithak stalker with nothing but a wooden spear, one of them whispered, what could we accomplish if we worked together? Similar conversations were taking place on dozens of worlds. The arena footage wasn't just spreading through official channels. It was being copied, transmitted, and shared through underground networks that the Empire had never been able to fully suppress. Every oppressed species in the galaxy was suddenly looking at their Zeltharian overseers with new eyes. In her upgraded quarters, Sarah was blissfully unaware of the chaos she had unleashed. Her days were filled with medical examinations, psychological evaluations, and lengthy interviews with various Empire officials. But she was also paying careful attention to the security arrangements, the guard rotations, and the growing number of protests taking place in the streets outside the arena complex. The Zeltharians were nervous, and nervous captors made mistakes. On her 5th day of recovery, Sarah received an unexpected visitor. Instead of Commander Vexter or one of his scientists, a young Zeltharian female entered her quarters. She wore simple civilian clothing rather than military armor, and her movements had none of the predatory grace that characterized most of her species. My name is Kesara, she said, activating a small device that created a privacy field around them. I work in the arena's communication division, but I'm not here in any official capacity. Sarah studied her visitor carefully. There was something different about this Zeltharian, something that reminded her more of her own crew than of the cold, calculating soldiers she had encountered so far. What can I do for you, Kesara? You can tell me if the stories are true. Did humans really evolve from prey animals that learned to hunt predators? That's a complicated question. We evolved from omnivores primarily. We could eat almost anything, which meant we could survive in environments that specialists couldn't handle. But yes, our ancestors did hunt creatures much larger and more dangerous than themselves. Kesara sat down across from Sarah, her posture suggesting someone who was taking a significant risk. The Empire teaches that evolution is about becoming the perfect predator. The strongest, fastest, most efficient killers rise to the top, and everything else exists to serve them or feed them. That's one theory, but it's not the only one. What's the alternative? Sarah leaned back against the wall. considering how to explain concepts that might be alien to someone raised in the Empire's rigid hierarchy. Cooperation, adaptation, the ability to survive by working together rather than by dominating others. She gestured around the luxurious cell. Your empire is built on the idea that might makes right, but that only works as long as you're the mightiest. What happens when you encounter something that's not stronger than you, but different enough that your strength doesn't matter? Kesara's amber eyes widened slightly. You're saying that humans aren't just another predator species. We're survivors. We endure by being flexible, by learning from our mistakes, and by taking care of each other. When one of us falls, the others pick up the burden. When we're threatened, we don't just fight back as individuals, we fight back as a species. And if the Empire continues to treat you as prey? Sarah's smile was answer enough. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Commander Vexter and a full squad of guards. The privacy field collapsed as they entered, and Kesara immediately stood and backed away from Sarah. "Communications Officer Kesara," Vexter said coldly, "you are not authorized to be in this sector." "I was conducting routine maintenance on the monitoring systems, Commander," she replied. But her voice carried a slight tremor that suggested she knew she had been caught doing something forbidden. "Return to your duties. We will discuss this later." After Kesara left, Vexter settled into the chair she had vacated. His usual entourage of advisors and scientists remained standing, creating an intimidating presence that filled the small room. "You seem to be having an interesting effect on our staff," he observed. "People who have never seen alternatives tend to get curious when alternatives present themselves," Sarah replied. "Indeed, which brings me to why I'm here." Vexter activated his own privacy field, much more sophisticated than the one Kesara had used. "The Imperial Council has made a decision regarding your species." Sarah waited, keeping her expression neutral despite the tension she felt building in the room. "Three options have been presented," Vexter continued. "First, we could classify humans as a dangerous predator species and eliminate them before they become a threat to the Empire. Second, we could attempt to incorporate your people as elite troops in our military forces. Third, we could establish diplomatic relations and treat humanity as equals rather than subjects. What's your recommendation?" "That depends entirely on what you tell me about your species' capabilities and intentions." Sarah considered her words carefully. Everything she said now would be analyzed, dissected, and used to determine humanity's fate. But she also sensed an opportunity that might not come again. "Commander, how many species are currently part of your empire?" 237 subjugated species, plus the Zeltharian core worlds. "And how many of those joined voluntarily?" Vexter's pause was answer enough. "Here's what I can tell you about humans," Sarah continued. "We're not interested in conquest for its own sake, but we're very interested in survival. We don't want to rule the galaxy, but we won't be ruled by anyone else either. Most importantly, we have a tendency to make friends with other species that share our values." "Values such as?" "Freedom, self-determination, the radical idea that strength should be used to protect the innocent rather than exploit them." The room fell silent. Finally, one of the advisors spoke up. "Are you suggesting that humans would attempt to liberate our subject species?" "I'm suggesting that humans have a long history of fighting against oppression, wherever we find it. We also have a long history of helping others do the same." Vexter leaned forward in his chair. "Let me be completely clear, Captain Chen. If the Empire determines that humanity represents a threat to our stability, we have the technological capability to sterilize your entire star system before your people even know we exist. And let me be completely clear in return, Commander. If you attack Earth, you won't be fighting just humans. You'll be fighting every species in the galaxy that's tired of being told they exist only to serve their betters." The implications of her words hung in the air like a challenge. For 3,000 years, the Zeltharian Empire had maintained control through superior technology and the threat of overwhelming force. But their control depended on their subject species accepting the idea that resistance was futile. Sarah's victory in the arena had shattered that illusion. If a single human could defeat their perfect predator, what could millions of humans do working together? What could billions of oppressed aliens accomplish if they had human allies to help them organize and fight back? "You're talking about war," Vexter said quietly. I'm talking about the inevitable result of treating free beings like property. Empires fall, Commander, all of them eventually. The only question is whether they fall gracefully or catastrophically. Over the following days, Sarah watched through her quarters viewing port as the situation in the city beyond continued to deteriorate. What had started as small protests by various alien species had grown into larger demonstrations demanding reforms in the Empire's treatment of subject peoples. Zeltharian security forces were struggling to maintain order without resorting to the kind of brutal suppression that might make the situation even worse. Meanwhile, the arena complex itself had become a focal point for the unrest. Every day brought new crowds of aliens from dozens of different species, all wanting to see the facility where a human had proven that the Empire's perfect predators could be defeated. Some came as curious observers, but others arrived with the unmistakable air of pilgrims visiting a sacred site. The Empire's leadership was facing a crisis they had never anticipated. Their entire system of government was based on the premise that some species were naturally superior to others, and that this superiority gave them the right to rule. But Sarah's victory had introduced a dangerous new concept. That superiority might be situational rather than absolute. On the 7th day after her arena battle, Sarah received another visit from Kesara. This time, the young Zeltharian was accompanied by 3 other individuals representing different subject species. They wore the simple clothing of arena workers, but their posture and the way they moved suggested they were much more than that. "We need to talk," Kesara said, once again activating a privacy field. "All of us." Sarah looked at her visitors more carefully. Besides Kesara, there was a tall, insected being with compound eyes and 4 arms, a mammalian creature covered in dark fur, and something that looked like a cross between a plant and a reptile. "You represent an underground movement," she said. It wasn't a question. "We represent hope," the insectoid replied, its voice coming through a translation device similar to the ones used by Zeltharian officials. "For the first time in generations, we have proof that the Empire's dominance isn't absolute." "What do you want from me?" "Information," the plant creature said. "About your species, your capabilities, your intentions. We need to know if humans would be willing to help other species achieve their freedom." Sarah studied each of her visitors in turn. These weren't casual revolutionaries. They were part of an organized resistance that had probably been operating in secret for decades. Her victory had given them something they had never had before, proof that the Empire could be defeated. "I can't speak for all of humanity," she said carefully, "but I can tell you what we believe in. We believe that every sentient being has the right to determine their own fate. We believe that cooperation is stronger than domination in the long run. And we believe that no one has the right to treat another person as property, no matter how strong they are." The 4 representatives exchanged glances that conveyed volumes of unspoken communication. "If we could get you off this world," Kesara asked, "could you contact your people? Could you tell them what's happening here?" Sarah felt her pulse quicken. They were offering her a chance to escape, but more than that, they were offering her a chance to bring humanity into a conflict that could reshape the entire galaxy. "Yes," she said without hesitation, "but you need to understand what you're asking for. If humans learn that there's an empire out here that enslaves entire species and feeds prisoners to monsters for entertainment, they won't just send diplomats. They'll send everything they have." "Everything?" the mammalian representative asked. "Our entire civilization. Every ship, every soldier, every scientist, every engineer. We don't abandon our own, and we don't let bullies operate unopposed if we can help it." The room fell silent as the implications of her words sank in. They weren't just talking about rescuing one human anymore. They were talking about starting a revolution that could spread across hundreds of worlds and involve billions of people. "When do we leave?" Sarah asked. Before anyone could answer, alarms began blaring throughout the complex. Emergency lights bathed the corridors in flashing red, and the sound of running feet echoed from multiple directions. "Security breach in Sector 7, a voice announced over the facility's communication system. "All personnel report to emergency stations." Kesara quickly deactivated the privacy field and moved toward the door. "That's our signal," she said. "The distraction we arranged is working, but we don't have much time." As they prepared to leave, Sarah took one last look around the luxurious cell that had been her home for the past week. When she had first been brought here, she had been one woman facing impossible odds. Now she was potentially the catalyst for a galactic war. The thought should have terrified her. Instead, it filled her with a fierce satisfaction. The Empire had made a fatal error when they had decided to treat humans as prey. They were about to learn why persistence hunters were the most dangerous predators of all. The escape from the arena complex was nothing like the dramatic action sequences Sarah had seen in entertainment broadcasts back on Earth. Instead, it was a carefully orchestrated operation that relied on detailed knowledge of the facility's security systems, guard rotations, and maintenance schedules that had been gathered over years of patient observation. Kesara led them through a maze of service corridors that Sarah had never seen during her captivity. The passages were narrow and poorly lit, designed for automated systems and the occasional maintenance worker rather than regular foot traffic. But they also bypassed every security checkpoint and surveillance system in the complex. "How long have you been planning this?" Sarah asked as they navigated through what appeared to be a ventilation shaft. "Planning to rescue you specifically? About 3 days," replied the insectoid being who had introduced himself as T. Zekvar. "Planning to infiltrate and eventually escape from this facility? About 20 years. They emerged into a storage area filled with arena equipment, everything from primitive weapons to the elaborate costumes worn by ceremonial gladiators. But hidden behind racks of decorative armor was a concealed entrance to another passage, this one leading directly into the city's underground infrastructure. The plant creature, whose name was something unpronounceable that translated roughly to deep root, had been monitoring the facility's communication systems from a hidden location in the city's water treatment plant. "Security forces are responding to multiple simultaneous breaches," it reported. "They don't know which one is real." "How many different resistance cells are operating in this city?" Sarah asked. "More than the Empire suspects, fewer than we need," the mammalian being replied. Its name was Shalvek, and it had spent the last 15 years working as a low-level administrator while secretly documenting the Empire's crimes against subject species. They traveled through the underground for hours, moving through tunnels that connected to subway systems, utility conduits, and ancient maintenance passages that predated the current city above. Along the way, Sarah caught glimpses of a vast network of beings from dozens of different species, all working together with the kind of coordination that could only come from years of careful planning. The safe house they eventually reached was located beneath a legitimate business that manufactured components for civilian transportation systems. To any casual observer, it would have appeared to be nothing more than a small factory with a slightly larger than normal basement storage area. But the basement had been extensively modified over the years. What had once been simple storage space now housed communication equipment sophisticated enough to maintain contact with resistance cells on dozens of other worlds. Workshops capable of manufacturing everything from forged identity documents to improvised weapons, and meeting spaces where representatives from different species could coordinate their activities without being detected by Empire surveillance. "Welcome to the heart of the revolution," Kesara said as they descended into the main operations center. Sarah looked around in amazement. She had expected to find a small group of desperate rebels hiding in the shadows. Instead, she was looking at what appeared to be the command center of a sophisticated intelligence operation. Dozens of beings worked at various stations, monitoring communications, analyzing data, and coordinating activities across multiple star systems. "How many worlds are involved in this?" she asked. "Direct active resistance? Maybe 30 systems," Shalvek replied. "But we have sympathizers and information networks on at least 150 worlds. The Empire likes to think their subjects are completely pacified, but the truth is that most of us have been waiting for the right opportunity. And my victory in the arena provided that opportunity." "More than you might realize." T. Zekvar gestured toward a large display screen that was showing news feeds from across the galaxy. "Look at what's happening." Sarah watched in fascination as reports flowed in from world after world. On the mining planet Altair VII, workers had gone on strike and were demanding better treatment. On the agricultural world of Kepler Prime, farmers were refusing to meet their production quotas. On the manufacturing hub of Zeta Centauri, entire factories had shut down as alien workers walked off their jobs. But most significantly, On dozens of worlds throughout the Empire, subject species were demanding to see the arena footage for themselves. The Empire's attempts to suppress the broadcasts had only made people more curious, and bootleg copies of Sarah's battle were spreading faster than the authorities could shut them down. It's not just about the fight itself, Deep Root explained, its translation device giving its naturally musical language an oddly mechanical quality. It's about what the fight represents. For the first time in 3,000 years, someone proved that the Empire's claims about natural superiority are false. The psychological impact has been enormous, added another voice from across the room. Sarah turned to see a being that looked remarkably similar to the Zeltharians but smaller and with different coloring. I'm Velter, and I represent the Zeltharian resistance movement. There are Zeltharians involved in the resistance. Sarah was genuinely surprised. More than you might think. Not all of us agree with the Empire's methods or philosophy. But until now, we had no way to challenge the system without committing species suicide. Over the next several hours, Sarah was briefed on the true scope of the resistance movement. What she learned was both encouraging and terrifying. The underground network was far more extensive and sophisticated than she had imagined, with cells operating on hundreds of worlds and communication networks that could coordinate activities across vast distances. But she also learned about the Empire's response to growing unrest. Military commanders were calling for immediate and brutal crackdowns on all subject species. Some were advocating for the complete extermination of any world that showed signs of rebellion, while others wanted to increase the frequency and brutality of arena games to remind everyone what happened to those who challenged imperial authority. Most disturbing of all was the intelligence they had gathered about the Empire's plans for humanity. They're preparing a preemptive strike against your home system, Velter informed her. 3 battle fleets with enough firepower to sterilize every planet in your solar system. The attack is scheduled to begin in 32 days. Sarah felt ice form in her stomach. How can they reach Earth so quickly? Our ship took over a year to get this far from Sol. The Empire has access to technology that your people haven't discovered yet. Quantum-fold drives that can cross galactic distances in weeks rather than years. If they launch their attack on schedule, your people won't even know they're coming until it's too late. Unless we warn them first, Kesara added. We have a ship, and we have enough intelligence about Imperial technology to give your people at least a fighting chance. The plan they outlined was ambitious and extremely dangerous. They would use a modified cargo transport to reach the edge of Imperial space, then transfer to a faster scout ship capable of making the journey to Earth in less than 3 weeks. Sarah would carry not only warning of the impending attack, but also detailed intelligence about Imperial technology, military capabilities, and most importantly, the locations of resistance cells throughout the galaxy. But first, they needed to get her off the planet without triggering a massive security response that would compromise the entire network. The Empire is already conducting planet-wide searches, Shalvek explained, showing her surveillance footage of Zeltharian security forces stopping and scanning every civilian transport leaving the world. They know you've escaped, and they're assuming you're trying to leave the system. So how do we get past them? The answer came from an unexpected source. Deep Root had been monitoring Imperial communications and had discovered something interesting about the search protocols. They're looking for a human female traveling with known resistance members, it explained. But they're not looking for a human female traveling as part of an official Imperial delegation. The deception was audacious in its simplicity. Using forged credentials and stolen Imperial uniforms, they would disguise Sarah as a xenobiologist being transferred to another facility for continued study. A small team of resistance members would pose as her Zeltharian escorts, complete with official transport authorizations and research documentation. The key is confidence, Velter explained as they prepared the disguises. Imperial bureaucracy is so rigid that most security personnel won't question official paperwork if it appears to be in order. They're trained to follow procedures, not to think independently. Sarah studied herself in the mirror after they finished applying the cosmetic modifications. Subtle changes to her skin tone and facial structure made her look less distinctly human, while the official research robes concealed her still healing injuries from the arena battle. I look like a completely different person, she observed. That's the idea. But remember, you need to act like a completely different person, too. You're no longer Captain Sarah Chen of the Wanderer's Hope Asterisk. Your research subject designation Alpha 7 being transferred for advanced study under Imperial Research Protocol 12. They spent hours rehearsing the deception, covering everything from proper posture and speech patterns to the specific procedures that would be followed during transport. Sarah had to learn to behave like someone who had been conditioned to accept imperial authority without question, which was perhaps the most difficult acting challenge she had ever faced. The morning of their departure brought new complications. Intelligence reports indicated that Commander Vexter had taken personal command of the search for Sarah, and he was using much more sophisticated scanning techniques than the standard security forces. "He knows you too well," Kesara warned. "If he sees you, even in disguise, he'll recognize something. Then we make sure he doesn't see me." The transport they had chosen for the first leg of their journey was a routine supply run to a research station in the outer system. Hundreds of similar flights departed every day, carrying everything from scientific equipment to food supplies. Their forged paperwork indicated that they were transporting specimens to a xenobiology laboratory for continued study. Sarah was placed in a medical containment unit that would prevent any casual observation while still allowing her to monitor their progress through a concealed display screen. To anyone conducting a routine inspection, she would appear to be an unconscious test subject being moved for medical reasons. The hardest part was the waiting. As their transport joined the queue of vessels departing the planet, Sarah watched through her hidden display as Zeltharian security teams boarded ship after ship, conducting thorough searches with equipment she didn't recognize. Some ships were cleared quickly, while others were detained for hours of intensive investigation. When their turn came, she held her breath as heavy footsteps approached her containment unit. Through the display, she could see two Zeltharian security officers examining the forged medical documents while Velter, disguised as a research supervisor, explained the nature of their cargo. "Standard xenobiological specimen," he said with practiced boredom. "Unconscious for transport safety, we're running behind schedule for the next phase of testing." One of the officers activated a scanner that bathed Sarah's containment unit in blue light. She forced herself to remain completely motionless, barely even allowing herself to breathe, as the device analyzed her biological signatures. Human female, approximately 30 years old, elevated stress indicators but within normal parameters for sedated transport, the scanner announced. "Documentation appears to be in order," the second officer concluded. "You're cleared for departure." As their transport finally left the planet's atmosphere and entered the shipping lane toward the outer system, Sarah allowed herself to relax slightly. They had successfully passed the first checkpoint, but she knew the real challenges were still ahead of them. "How long until we reach the transfer point?" she asked through the unit's communication system. 6 hours to the research station, then another 2 hours to reach the scout ship," Velter replied. "But we're not clear yet. Long-range scanners show multiple Imperial patrol ships conducting random inspections throughout the system." Sarah settled back for what she knew would be a tense journey. Every few minutes, their transport received new routing instructions as traffic control adjusted flight paths to avoid congested areas or security operations. Each course change brought them closer to their destination, but it also brought new opportunities for something to go wrong. 3 hours into the flight, they received a priority communication that made everyone on the bridge freeze. "Transport designation 77 Alpha, this is Imperial Security Command. You are ordered to halt and prepare for detailed inspection. Commander Vexter is personally reviewing all xenobiological transports departing the system." Through her display screen, Sarah watched Velter's face go pale. If Vexter boarded their ship, their deception would be discovered within minutes. The commander knew too much about human physiology and behavior to be fooled by disguises and forged paperwork. "What do we do?" Kesara whispered from her position at the navigation console. Sarah made a decision that she knew would either save them or doom them all. "Open the communication channel," she ordered. "Let me talk to him." Commander Vexter's image appeared on the transport's main communication screen, his amber eyes scanning the bridge with predatory intensity. Sarah remained hidden in her medical containment unit, but she could see him clearly through her concealed display. Transport 77 Alpha, I am conducting personal inspections of all vessels carrying xenobiological cargo, he announced. Prepare to be boarded in 30 minutes. Velter, still maintaining his disguise as a research supervisor, stepped forward. Commander, with respect, we are carrying time-sensitive specimens that cannot be disturbed during transport. Any delay could compromise months of research. All research can be repeated, Vexter replied coldly. Escaped prisoners cannot be recaptured once they leave the system. Sarah made her decision. Through the unit's internal communication system, she whispered to her companions, "Accept the boarding, don't resist, and when I give you the signal, activate the emergency beacon we discussed." Sarah, if he recognizes you, Kesara started. He's going to recognize me anyway, but maybe I can use that to our advantage. Over the next 20 minutes, they watched as Vexter's personal shuttle approached their transport. The commander was taking no chances. He had brought a full squad of elite guards and scanning equipment sophisticated enough to detect almost any deception. When the boarding party entered the transport, Sarah remained motionless in her containment unit, but she was fully conscious and alert. Through her display, she watched Vexter systematically examine every compartment of the ship, checking documentation, scanning for hidden compartments, and questioning each member of the disguised resistance team. Finally, he approached her containment unit. "What is the nature of this specimen?" he asked Velter. "Standard human female, captured during a routine patrol. We're transporting her to the research facility for continued psychological evaluation." Vexter activated his personal scanner, a device much more sophisticated than the ones used by regular security forces. As the scanning beam passed over Sarah's containment unit, she knew her biological disguise would be completely ineffective. "Interesting," Vexter murmured as he studied the readout. "This human shows signs of recent combat injuries, elevated stress hormones consistent with arena combat, and neural patterns indicating high-level tactical awareness." He reached for the containment unit's release mechanism. "There's also something familiar about these readings." The moment the unit opened, Sarah opened her eyes and looked directly at him. "Hello, Commander. I was wondering when you'd figure it out." The bridge erupted in chaos as Vexter's guards raised their weapons, but the commander held up a hand to stop them. His amber eyes were locked on Sarah's face with an expression that combined admiration, anger, and something that might have been respect. "Captain Sarah Chen of the Wanderer's Hope Asterisk, I should have known you would attempt something like this." Sarah slowly sat up in the containment unit, making no sudden movements that might trigger a violent response from the guards. "You should have known better than to underestimate humans in the first place." "Indeed, but your escape ends here. You will return to the planet's surface for continued detention, and your companions will face charges of treason against the Empire." "Actually, Commander, I don't think that's going to happen." Vexter's eyes narrowed. "You are outnumbered, outgunned, and surrounded. What makes you think you have any choice in the matter?" Sarah smiled, and once again, several of the Zeltharian guards took involuntary steps backward. "Because you're not just dealing with me anymore. Signal now, Kesara." Before Vexter could react, Kesara activated the emergency beacon they had prepared. But instead of calling for rescue, the signal triggered something much more significant. Throughout the transport ship, hidden communication devices began broadcasting simultaneously. But they weren't sending distress calls or requests for help. They were transmitting a pre-recorded message to every resistance cell within range, and those cells were immediately retransmitting it to others in a chain reaction that would spread across hundreds of star systems within hours. The message was Sarah herself, speaking directly to the camera with the calm confidence that had carried her through the arena battle. "My name is Captain Sarah Chen of the human exploration vessel Wanderer's Hope Asterisk. I am broadcasting this message to every oppressed species within the Zeltharian Empire and to anyone else who might be listening. 6 weeks ago, my ship was captured and my crew was murdered by Imperial forces. I was taken to the grand arena of Zelthar and forced to fight a Krithak stalker for the entertainment of Empire citizens." On the transport bridge, Vexter watched in growing horror as he realized what was happening. This wasn't just an escape attempt. It was a coordinated propaganda operation designed to spread across the entire galaxy. "I killed that stalker," Sarah's recorded message continued. Not because I was stronger or faster or better armed, but because I refused to accept the Empire's definition of what I was supposed to be. They called me prey. I proved them wrong. The message went on to detail everything Sarah had learned about the resistance movement, the Empire's treatment of subject species, and most importantly, the planned attack on Earth. The Empire has decided that humanity represents a threat to their continued dominance. In less than 30 days, they plan to launch a preemptive strike against my homeworld with enough firepower to exterminate every human being in existence. They're doing this not because we've attacked them, but because we've proven that their claims of superiority are false. Vexter moved toward the communication console, intending to cut off the transmission, but Velter stepped into his path. I wouldn't do that, Commander. This message is being broadcast from dozens of hidden transmitters throughout the system. Stopping one transmission won't prevent the others from reaching their destinations. But more importantly, Sarah added from her position in the containment unit, cutting off the transmission now would only prove everything I said in the message. You'd be demonstrating that the Empire is so afraid of the truth that they'll use force to silence it. The recorded message continued. To every species that has been told you exist only to serve your betters, to everyone who has been forced to accept that might makes right, I want you to know that you have a choice. The Empire's power is not absolute. Their perfect predators can be defeated. Their claims of superiority are lies designed to keep you in chains. And to my fellow humans, if this message reaches you, they're coming. 3 battle fleets with quantum fold drives and weapons we've never seen before. But you're not alone. There are billions of beings throughout the galaxy who are ready to fight for their freedom if they know they have allies. Vexter had gone completely still, his mind racing through the implications of what was happening. Within hours, this message would reach every major population center in the Empire. The careful balance of fear and resignation that kept hundreds of worlds under control was about to be shattered. You've just started a war, he said quietly. No, Commander. Your Empire started this war 3,000 years ago when they decided that strength gave them the right to enslave entire civilizations. I just gave the other side a reason to hope they could win. The recorded message reached its conclusion. This is Captain Sarah Chen, broadcasting from somewhere in Imperial space. I may not survive to see what happens next, but I know that humans don't abandon their own and we don't let bullies operate unopposed. To the Resistance, your moment has come. To the Empire, you picked the wrong species to use as prey. And to anyone else who might be listening, remember that every predator becomes prey eventually when they encounter something they don't understand. As the transmission ended, Vexter's communication system began receiving priority alerts from across the Empire. Planets that had been stable for centuries were reporting massive civil unrest. Military commanders were requesting immediate reinforcements to deal with organized rebellions. And most disturbing of all, several worlds were reporting that their Zeltharian administrators had simply disappeared overnight, apparently evacuated by their own security forces. Do you have any idea what you've done? Vexter asked. I've given people hope, Sarah replied. And I've warned my species that they need to prepare for war. What happens next depends on how your Empire chooses to respond. One of Vexter's guards approached him with a priority communication from Imperial Command. After reading it, the commander's expression became even grimmer. The Imperial Council has just authorized Protocol 7, he announced. Complete military suppression of all subject species, immediate execution of suspected resistance members, and acceleration of the attack on your homeworld. How accelerated? Sarah asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. The attack fleets will depart within 72 hours. Your people will have less than 3 weeks to prepare. Sarah felt a cold certainty settle in her chest. The Empire had just made the same mistake that countless tyrants throughout human history had made when faced with resistance. They had chosen to escalate rather than negotiate. Then you'd better kill me now, Commander, because if you let me live, I'm going to make sure that every human in the galaxy knows exactly what's coming and exactly how to fight it. Vexter studied her for a long moment, his amber eyes reflecting something that might have been sadness. I believe you would, he said finally. Then to his guards, stand down. The guards looked at him in confusion, but slowly lowered their weapons. Commander, one of them asked. I said stand down. All of you return to the shuttle. Sir, our orders are to apprehend the escaped prisoner and... Our orders have just changed. Vexter's voice carried the absolute authority of someone accustomed to instant obedience. Captain Chen, you have 1 hour to reach the edge of Imperial space before I report that this transport suffered a catastrophic system failure that prevented me from completing my inspection. Sarah stared at him in surprise. Why? Because in the past hour, I've received reports of rebellion on 37 worlds. Because 3 of my own staff officers have defected to join resistance cells. And because I've spent my entire career serving an empire that I'm beginning to realize may not deserve to survive. He turned toward the transport's exit, then paused. Captain Chen, when you reach your people, tell them something for me. Tell them that not all Zeltharians agree with our government's policies. And tell them that if they're looking for allies in the coming war, they might find some in unexpected places. After Vexter and his team departed, the transport bridge remained silent for several minutes as everyone processed what had just happened. Did he really just let us go? Kesara asked. He did more than that, Velter replied, studying the navigation display. Look at our flight path authorization. He's given us priority clearance to the edge of the system with no further inspections required. Sarah climbed out of the containment unit and looked around at her companions. Representatives of 4 different species, all working together to fight against oppression, all willing to risk everything for the chance at freedom. What's our status on the message transmission? Broadcasting successfully to over 200 worlds and growing, Tzekva reported. The resistance networks are retransmitting as fast as they receive it. By tomorrow, every major population center in the Empire will have seen it. And the scout ship, waiting for us at the rendezvous point. We can reach human space in 18 days if we don't encounter any delays. Sarah nodded, her mind already racing ahead to everything that would need to happen once they reached Earth. The message would provide advance warning, but humanity would need much more than warning to survive what was coming. They would need allies, technology, and most importantly, they would need to understand that this was about more than just human survival. This was about the future of freedom in the galaxy. As their transport accelerated toward the edge of the Zeltharian system, Sarah watched through the viewports as the first signs of the revolution became visible. Ships were departing from planets throughout the system, many of them clearly overloaded with refugees fleeing what everyone expected to become a war zone. But other ships were moving with the purposeful coordination of military vessels, suggesting that the resistance had resources and organization that the Empire had never suspected. The war that was coming would be unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. It wouldn't just be humans fighting Zeltharians. It would be every oppressed species fighting for their right to exist as free beings. And it had all started with one human refusing to be prey. 18 days later, as their scout ship entered the Sol system and began broadcasting warnings to every human facility within range, Sarah looked back toward the direction they had come from and smiled grimly. The Empire had wanted to see what happened when they trapped a human with a deadly predator. Now they were about to find out what happened when they threatened humanity itself.